demos and the backstory of its development. This album is called You Are Who You Know, and it came out in December of 2022. Of the 3 albums that I released in 2022, this was the last. And it, again, was comprised mostly of demos that were recorded in the year 2020 that eventually became redeveloped and redone in the years to come. This album is based entirely on people that I had in some way associated with in my life at the time, many of which are forgotten people of my past, some people which are still involved in my life now. But at the time, I just wanted to make an album about people, just to have a general structure, a concept to work with, some sort of creative box to dwell in. And this album was being finished around the time that AI art was beginning to catch on, was in its early stages of development. And I comprised it using 2 different AI-generated images that I had developed with drawings or doodles that I made. One of them being these 2 people who are looking at a painting. Which was the original idea. I wanted to seem something like a painting, but also kind of like a police lineup, like a cop and another guy looking, investigating some crooks. But it's just a group of vaguely people who kind of look like people, but also don't, as the early stages of AI couldn't quite capture the image of people, but it developed something pretty interesting, and I ended up taking that and photoshopping it into this other image, and made it into the artwork that we now know as You Are Who You Know. After the course of the demos from the early stages, I spent about maybe 5 months, 6 months finishing this album. It's comprised of 14 songs, where every song is based off of a particular individual. And I thought it'd be fun to go about and get a little bit of backstory and analysis of all the people that were written about here. The first one here, Martha's Diary, was one of the first ones that I had written lyrics for that was based specifically on one particular person, which actually started the initial interest in wanting to do a record about people, as another one that was ironically about another person just came out soon after. But Martha was a woman who worked at my job at the time, and she was a little bit older, and by a little bit I mean maybe like mid-40s, that I didn't really know very well initially when I started working there, and then when I became manager, I got to know her a little better and really kind of, swooned over this woman. But she was married and had kids, of course, so that wasn't really on the table. But just the idea of wondering if she in secrecy has ever thought about me and Martha's private diary. But at the time, I really just was using the song for her namesake because I liked the name Martha, and it really wasn't directed specifically about her, but I just had her in mind as the jumping off point for lyrics, when it's really just about any given girl who goes writes about them in their diary and then has a falling out with the guy and rips the page out of the diary or erases it and whatever. The second song, Saul's Amnesia, was written about a guy that I met at a concert that I subsequently ran into at a number of concerts and just other establishments. And many of the times, he just didn't seem to remember me, but I always remembered him. But ironically enough, he almost always had his girlfriend with him, and I could never remember her name. But it seemed to me, by another interaction that we had, that I'm not really at liberty to say, but he seemed to forget that we had that interaction at all, despite us messaging each other. And it seemed that I thought maybe he had some sort of amnesia, some sort of medical forgetfulness, and he was just the perfect subject for this song that I was writing at the time. I still see him every once in a while at concerts. The song Luke's Liminal Eye was written about a guy named Lucas Ratcliffe, who actually designed the album artwork for Private Either, and an early beta version of the artwork for the album that eventually became Channel Zero Forgotten Media. But he develops artwork specializing in liminal spaces that I've always admired and was a big fan of. And eventually, when I came to work with him, I never actually met him in person, but online, usually when I've interacted with people that I know solely from Instagram or Twitter, they're usually very much business savvy and seem like they really only do their artistry for the sake of money. And to me, Lucas Ratcliffe just felt very not like that. I felt like him and I had very similar approach to artwork, where we just developed things simply for the sake of them existing and less for notoriety and money. And we both just had acute interests in abstract concepts like liminality and hypnagogia and nostalgia and analog horror. Similar mindsets, and great minds think alike. I hope potentially I can work with him again, but I need to do something a little more out of the box. This next song, Guillermo's on the Line. This was one of the songs that actually wasn't written in the year 2020. It was written in like the summer of 2022. But I knew when I was making this album that I had to write a song about Guillermo. And there was just a lot to write about, because Guillermo Frosto is my best friend and has been for almost 10 years. And I told him when I was making this album that he wanted to have a song of mine, or a song about him on this album. So this is the one that came about, which reflects a lot of our over-the-phone conversations, because Guillermo lives in Seattle and I live in Chicago. So the majority of our time spent is usually on the phone. But we see each other, maybe annually. And when I saw him last summer, I showed him this song, the early stages of it, I guess, which lyrically expressed a lot of the inside jokes that we had together, and a lot of the strange interactions that we've discussed over the phone, both practical and completely absurd. It's one of the longest songs I've actually released, and I developed it with this long, faded spoken word intro intro, inspired by a song that he liked a lot, but is kind of mysterious and unknown. It's actually one of the only songs I've ever released that really that was spoken word based, because he's really into music like that. Like the music of, Tom Waits or Lou Reed. Track 5's Joanna's Memoirs. This was written within like a week after writing the song Martha's Diary, because Joanna was another coworker of mine who also worked at the same job, but she was technically my boss, and I was not Martha's boss, but Joanna was also kind of Martha's boss. We were kind of in the same boat, but I had a day in management that was just absurdly stressful, and both of us were just going to ridiculous lengths to solve some problem that really didn't matter. Well, it mattered to the job, didn't matter to us, and we were just talking a little bit more personally about our ways of approaching this job. And I felt like she was a little bit more skilled and organized to be working in a job like that, and she really should be doing something more like movie production or writing a novel. So I decided that the idea of Joanna's Memoirs just had a nice ring to it, and the idea of her eventually being successful and writing about me in her memoirs, or if she even would write about me, considering I wrote about her. And then not long after this, she fired me, so it became more of a bittersweet song for me. But after Martha's Diary was written and Joanna's was written in the following couple days, I immediately knew that I wanted to do a record just about people that I knew, even though both of these people just happened to be folks who I worked with, but I didn't want to do an album just about coworkers, But some of these songs that were written about people were developed, even before these songs were, but they just didn't really have their own place or a song that had their name in the title. Because as you can see, all of these have the name of the person as the first line in the title of the song, including this next one, Bailey Come Back, which is a play on words to the song Baby Come Back, which is a classic hit by the band Player. But Bailey was a girl who worked as a security guard at Cinespace Studios in Chicago. And I'd gotten to know her only because I was a delivery driver at Kitsch Fix at the time, and I delivered to Cinespace Studios, and I'd occasionally see her working at the front desk, and we'd chat, and it came to a point where I considered asking her out. And by that point, I pretty much never saw her again because I was promoted to manager and I didn't drive anymore. So it very much felt like a missed opportunity. But even in the rare occasion where I did go to Cinespace, I still never ran into her. The idea of missed opportunities was much inspired by this song. And the music of this song is almost entirely based off of a sample from a TV show theme song, which I will leave unnamed. And the song itself didn't really have much going on outside of that sample until I had the idea of recording saxophone for another song after acquiring my old saxophone from my childhood, from my folks' house. And after I recorded it for another song, I decided to record it for this song, and it really brought it to life. And the next song is called Snow Was an Island Boy. And this is a reference to Snow Ellett, who's a musician here in Chicago that I play guitar for all their live shows, including one that I have coming up in 2 days. And Snow is just a very charismatic person and just is very likable. But sometimes Snow can be a little bit forgetful. And on the first Noella tour, I had a vague memory of waking up in our tour van to Snow climbing over the seat to get into the back while holding a White Claw and saying, "I'm going Island Boy," which is a reference to the Island Boy viral video of those two guys who were rapping. And just kind of waking up to people in the back all getting buzzed and having a good time and talking just happened to be a very memorable moment from that tour for me. And when I knew I wanted to write a song about people, this was one of the earlier ones that I had came up with from a beat that didn't really have anything. And then when I knew had the title Snow Was an Island Boy, I knew the beat would work perfectly for it because it had tropical vibes. And some of these songs, I actually do have some lyric sheets that right here in this very room, where I do my vocal recordings for some of these songs that were recorded later after my roommate moved out and I turned my old room into a vocal booth. I would take these lyric sheets, write them down in Sharpie and tape them to the wall so I could look at them hands-free when I'm recording, and I actually have some of them right here. I only have them for a couple songs, but I do have it for Snow Was an Island Boy in particular. If you wanted to see how I originally wrote them out. Forgot your keys in the record store. Left them on the bathroom floor. That's a reference to a true story that happened when we were in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we went to a record store and Snow left the keys to our tour van in the bathroom at that record shop. And this is like the first verse, the second verse, and the third verse, all written out here. And I strove to kind of sing it in the style of how Snow sings a little bit, but didn't quite produce it the same. 19 or 23. Those are references to Snow songs, one that's released, one that's unreleased. To Some Your Genius, that's another reference to a song of his. The next song here is called Paul's Private Darkness. This is probably the earliest song that I developed off of this album, and was actually written about Paul at the time, but I ended up re-recording the lyrics and giving it a new title. This is a reference to an old friend and roommate of mine named Paul Sotnick, who at one point I was really good friends with and fellow musician, but in the months prior to the pandemic, he started to drift away a little bit, become kind of bitter, and then in the year 2020, we just kind of weren't really doing very well in our friendship, and things started to fall apart, and a lot of it was just simply a lack of communication, and Paul was kind of living in his own miserable little world, and took a lot of his unexpressed anger out on me for no reason. But the term private darkness is actually another reference to the Marvel TV shows. The show Daredevil, where they sometimes refer to Daredevil, who's a blind defined superhero as living in his private darkness, filled with rage, which is metaphorically similar to the private darkness that Paul was dwelling in. The original title for it was called Reverse Engineering. That was written like just several years before this came out, at the beginning of our turbulent relationship. The next song, Olive and Her Lonely Heart, is a kind of a sad, vague memory of somebody that I don't see anymore. The title I've actually had for a long time, but I've just never really had a use for it until this album. But Olive was the name of a girl who was the fiance of a friend of mine in college, and I only hung out with her maybe twice at their house, and then sometime later, her husband, my friend from college, just somehow disappeared and was just gone from social media. He was gone from her life, like on her social media. He was not there anymore, and I never knew why. And by the time I came to that realization, it'd been too long, and I was too afraid to ask her personally what happened. But I know for certain that it was something sad or tragic, and I knew that she would have been hurting at the time, but I'm sure she's doing okay now. And I always liked that name, Olive. This next song, Lexi Pays the Price, is a reference to one of my high school friends named Lexi Price. It's kind of a play on words. But as funny as the title is, the story behind it is not so funny. It's my old friend Lexi from high school, who I saw every once in a while when I came back to town, but really didn't speak much to. Kind of had a lot of struggles of her own with drug use. And I came back one year, and about a month prior, she'd expressed her falling out and troubles with drug use, and talked about rehab and AA or NA, and it's really the only time that I've come back to reconnect with somebody who'd fallen into a bit of despair like that. But it was interesting to see how she was living post that. But as far as I know now, since she's been clean and hopefully doing better, I actually do have the lyric sheets for this one too, because it was also lyrics were written and recorded kind of in the later stages of this album. Yeah, kind of first verse, first chorus, second verse, second chorus. The drums in this song were sampled from an artist from the 80s that was actually sampled in another song by an artist named 18 Karat Affair. And I really liked that beat for that song, and I'd always kind of created my own vocal melody on top of it. So then when I tracked down the original sample used, I used that of my own and wrote the song Lexi Pays the Price using that vocal melody that I had in my head. This next song, Brian's Only Shades. This is a song about a guy in the Chicago scene who really made it big with his band called French Police. And I'd witnessed French Police's development from the really early stages. And Brian Flores is his name. he'd always wear sunglasses all the time. It was just part of his look. And he expressed that it was also because of just a hypersensitivity to light, which I can kind of relate to now. And I wanted to write a song that was kind of similar in style to the music that they make, because I often quote them as an inspiration for artists that kind of take big steps, take the path of music that I wish I could take a lot of these times, and actually make them happen. But his band French Police, they have a lot of really good music. And I came to know Brian initially when he first left his other band and started French Police as a 5-piece. Back when I was doing DIY shows in Chicago, I had booked them at one of their first gigs, and I subsequently saw them at a number of other shows, and just really took off from there. And speaking of DIY shows, this next song, Lori's Odyssey, is written about a woman named Lori Ranger. And Lori was the somewhat owner and founder of this DIY space in Chicago called the Pilsen Art House, which is the neighborhood that I live in, and is only a brisk 4-block walk away from where I live. So it was the perfect venue for me to establish myself as a showrunner at. So I threw a lot of live music events and participated in a lot of other stuff there, and it was a great spot for the time being. Eventually the pandemic kicked in and kind of complicated everything, and now the venue is shut down, and Lori now lives in New Mexico, so I don't see her very much. But Lori was definitely an inspiration for me as an artist, and also just very influential in the Chicago scene at the time. Very social and very much looking out for the community. And Lori always wanted to travel. She always wanted to pretty much just live in a van and live the nomadic lifestyle and drive around the world. And now she's, in a way, doing so. And Lori's son, Kyle Ranker, ended up working at the job with Martha and Joanna here, and I became somewhat of his boss, but also just became good friends with him. The song Alex at the Wheel is a reference to my friend Alex Trevino, who ironically lives just 1 block away from the Pilsen Art House right in my neighborhood, and has also been a good friend of mine for almost a decade. And last summer, we drove to Brooklyn to go hang out at this music festival called 100% Electronicon. It was the 3rd music festival, and I was very excited to be a part of it, and I invited him along. And on the drive back, Alex kind of insisted that he did all the driving, because he just likes to drive, and I like to, just chill in the passenger seat. I think, really, realistically, he might have just been afraid of how I drive, because I'm kind of a speed demon. But he ended up making the entire drive from Brooklyn back to Chicago in 1 day. It was kind of unexpected, but definitely ideal. And along the way, he introduced me to this band called Sports, which I always knew but have never listened to, but he put on this album that I really liked, and one of the songs from that album, which is called, what's it called? It's called Everyone's Invited. It's their 3rd album. And I made this song kind of inspired by one of those songs and about the album in general. was also one of the later ones I recorded, so I do have lyric sheets for that as well, as you can see. So these are like verse 1 and 2, and these are kind of the choruses here. Hey Alex, would you drive that car, drive back all the way? This was also another song that I recorded saxophone for, which really kind of made the halfway point of the song, contemporized it a little bit. And this last song here, Patty's Retirement, was written also at the piano and was inspired by a woman named Patty, who was one of my first teachers that I played for when I was working as a ballet accompanist. And she was very old and really needed to retire. And I kind of had a difficult time working for her because she just wasn't really equipped to be doing that job anymore. But realistically, I also was very unqualified for that job, and the fact that she was also a bit overstayed her welcome a little bit, and we were kind of in the same boat, and she was very tolerant and patient of me in the learning curve of being a ballet accompanist. And then I kind of didn't enjoy playing for her a lot of the time. It was just hard to work with somebody who's a little bit senile. But then eventually we had a substitute, and the substitute ended up becoming the new teacher for the rest of the semester because Patty had a stroke and wasn't able to do her job anymore and was basically sent to live with her family in another state and involuntarily had retired. And it was kind of bittersweet because I kind of got what I wanted, but at what cost, you know? At her expense, it wasn't really worth it, and it was kind of sad to see her go. Because I didn't really appreciate how lucky I was to have her in the process of developing my skills as a pianist. But of course, I didn't really do her justice because her name is actually spelled with an I instead of a Y. But even though I knew that, I thought just this iteration of the word Patty would fit just the typography better. It just looked more visually appealing than Patty with an I. This is also one that I have lyric sheets for. One of the earlier ones that was drafted over and over again, because most of these I'd kind of written and then rewritten again in Sharpie, but these are the original scribbles that I made when I was writing sitting at the piano. So that's all 14 songs and all 14 people based off of those songs. Then of course there's this guy who's not anything in particular, but I used a lot of fake representations of digitalized versions of people in the early stages of computer animation, and a lot of that was used in the development of the promo for this album. The visual aesthetic very much was inspired by the early animations of the 80s that were long forgotten. I have kind of a fascination with automatonophobia, which is the fear of things that look like people but aren't people. And that I kind of explored a lot through the visual aesthetics of this album. And this album was, of course, homemade. I kind of used the bad rundown jewel cases, the ones that kind of are a little bit cracked or dirty, just to use as the demos for this. But who knows, maybe somebody will want it. So, this is probably the album that kind of was a point in my life as a music producer where I felt I was actually developing some stuff that was more quality. There was a noticeable improvement in my production style because I'd had so much practice with the 2 albums prior and learned from my mistakes. But even since then, my production technique has improved much based off the tracks from this album, so hopefully the next one will sound better. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Hope anyone who's a fan of this album got some information that they so longed for and some backstory. And hopefully the people who the songs were written about eventually will hear them. I didn't really go out of my way to tell many of them about it, unless they were concurrently a part of my life, because I was really interested in seeing if they actually followed the things that I did and would actually pick up that there was a song written about them, because I assume most people would know if they actually checked out the album if it was that it was written about them. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully we'll have more album breakdowns in the future.